In December 1942, 10 British Royal Marines slipped into the freezing water of the Atlantic from a submarine off the coast of occupied France, climbing into 6 small, fragile canoes, barely large enough to hold 2 men each. Their mission was to paddle over 60 miles up one of the most heavily guarded rivers in occupied Europe, past German patrol boats, searchlights, and coastal defenses, to reach the harbor of Bordeaux and destroy German merchant shipping, using nothing more than magnetic limpet mines they would attach to enemy hulls by hand, in the dark, underwater. Of the 10 men who paddled into that river, only 2 would make it back to Britain alive. This is the true story of Operation Frankton, a mission so audacious that even senior British military planners considered it close to a suicide operation from the very outset, carried out by men who would come to be known in the years following the war as the Cockleshell Heroes. By late 1942, German-occupied France had become an increasingly vital hub for German naval and merchant shipping operations, with the port city of Bordeaux, located along the Gironde estuary on France's Atlantic coast, functioning as one of the most important remaining harbors through which German forces continue to receive critical war materials, including rubber and other strategic resources, being shipped in from ports in Asia through blockade-running vessels that had, thus far, largely succeeded in evading the broader Allied naval blockade of German-controlled Europe. By late 1942, German-occupied France had become an increasingly vital hub for German naval and merchant shipping operations, with the port city of Bordeaux, located along the Gironde estuary on France's Atlantic coast, functioning as one of the most important remaining harbors through which German forces continue to receive critical war materials, including rubber and other strategic resources, being shipped in from ports in Asia through blockade-running vessels that had, thus far, largely succeeded in evading the broader Allied naval blockade of German-controlled Europe. These blockade-running vessels represented a genuinely significant, if relatively narrow, lifeline for German war production, since natural rubber and various other raw materials essential to German industrial and military manufacturing were simply unavailable from any source within German-controlled continental Europe, meaning that any successful shipment that managed to slip through the Allied naval blockade and reach a port like Bordeaux represented a genuinely valuable contribution to Germany's continued ability to produce the vehicles, aircraft components, and other manufactured goods that depended on these otherwise unavailable raw materials. British intelligence services had identified Bordeaux as a particularly significant node in this supply chain, tracking the arrival and departure of blockade runners at the harbor with considerable interest, and growing increasingly convinced that disrupting operations at this specific location could meaningfully impact Germany's access to these critical materials. British military intelligence recognized that successfully disrupting shipping operations at Bordeaux could inflict genuine, significant damage on Germany's ability to continue receiving these critical war materials. But the harbor itself presented an enormously difficult target for any conventional military attack. Bordeaux lay approximately 60 miles inland from the Atlantic coast, connected to the open ocean by the Gironde estuary, a body of water heavily patrolled by German naval forces and defended by coastal artillery positions, making any conventional naval assault against the harbor itself essentially unfeasible without accepting catastrophic losses, while the distance from the coast placed the target well beyond the effective range of any aerial bombing raid, precise enough to reliably strike specific docked vessels, without risking substantial civilian casualties in the surrounding city. Combined Operations Headquarters, the British Military Command specifically tasked with developing and coordinating unconventional raiding operations against German-occupied territory, concluded that the only realistic approach to striking effectively at Bordeaux Harbor would involve a small team of specially trained operatives traveling by canoe under cover of darkness, navigating the considerable distance up the Gironde estuary specifically to avoid the kind of detection that any larger, more conventional naval vessel would almost certainly trigger, before manually attaching explosive charges directly to the hulls of targeted German merchant vessels docked within the harbor itself. Command of this genuinely extraordinary mission was given to Major Herbert Blondie Hasler, an experienced Royal Marines officer who had already developed and championed the specific tactical approach of using small canoes for clandestine raiding operations, having spent considerable time prior to the mission advocating for and refining the specialized equipment and training techniques that a mission of this nature would require. Convinced that small, quiet, low-profile canoes represented a genuinely viable method for delivering a raiding party deep into heavily defended enemy territory that larger, more conventional vessels could never successfully approach undetected.
Hasler had spent years prior to the war developing a genuine personal expertise in small boat handling and canoe navigation, interests that, in the context of peacetime, might have remained little more than a personal hobby, but that took on genuine military significance once Hasler began advocating within Combined Operations Command for the development of a specialized raiding capability built specifically around these small, easily concealed vessels.
His advocacy for this unconventional approach initially met with some skepticism from more conventionally minded planners within the broader British military establishment, who questioned whether such a physically demanding, high-risk approach could realistically deliver meaningful strategic results proportionate to the risk it would require volunteers to accept. Skepticism that Hasler worked to overcome through persistent advocacy and detailed technical planning, demonstrating the specific tactical advantages small canoes could offer against targets like Bordeaux that remained effectively unreachable by any more conventional means. Hasler selected and trained a team of Royal Marines specifically for this mission, developing specialized techniques for the extraordinarily demanding physical challenge of paddling small two-man canoes, specifically designed collapsible vessels known as cockles, over the considerable distance the mission would require, while carrying the substantial weight of explosive charges, equipment, and supplies the operation demanded, all while maintaining strict operational silence and avoiding detection throughout an extended, physically exhausting journey through hostile, heavily patrolled waters. The specific canoes selected for the mission, known within military circles as cockles, were lightweight, collapsible vessels, originally designed for a combination of portability and relatively quiet, low-profile water travel, characteristics that made them genuinely well-suited to the specific demands of a clandestine raiding mission, but that also made them inherently fragile and vulnerable to the kind of rough water conditions, strong currents, and general physical wear that an extended, multi-day journey up a heavily trafficked tidal estuary would inevitably involve, a fundamental tension between the vessel's tactical advantages and its practical durability limitations that would prove directly relevant to the severe losses the mission's raiding party would go on to suffer during its approach towards Bordeaux.
The training regimen Hasler developed for his selected team proved genuinely demanding, requiring the Marines to master specialized paddling and navigation techniques specific to the small, tippy cockle canoes, develop the physical endurance necessary to sustain many hours of continuous paddling under extreme physical strain, and master the specific underwater demolition techniques required to properly attach and arm the magnetic limpet mines that would serve as the mission's primary offensive weapon against the targeted German vessels once the team successfully reached Bordeaux harbor itself.
In early December 1942, the British submarine HMS Tuna transported Hasler's team of 10 Marines, organized into 5 two-man canoe crews, to a launch position near the mouth of the Gironde estuary, from which the team would need to begin the genuinely daunting task of paddling their small canoes the considerable remaining distance to reach Bordeaux harbor itself, navigating entirely under cover of darkness and remaining concealed during daylight hours to avoid detection by German patrols and coastal observers who maintained constant vigilance along this strategically important stretch of French coastline. The mission encountered severe difficulty almost immediately upon launch, with the team's canoes facing genuinely dangerous, turbulent conditions as they attempted to navigate through rough surf and strong currents near the estuary's mouth. Conditions that resulted in the loss of one canoe and its two-man crew almost immediately, with these 2 Marines never being recovered and presumed to have drowned in the difficult launch conditions before the mission had even properly begun. An early, sobering demonstration of just how genuinely dangerous the entire undertaking would prove to be, even before the team faced any direct German opposition. A second canoe was subsequently lost during the following days of the difficult extended paddle up the estuary, with its 2-man crew becoming separated from the main group and ultimately being captured by German forces after coming ashore,
following standing military orders under the notorious Commando order that Hitler had issued, specifically directing that captured Allied Commando personnel be executed rather than treated as conventional prisoners of war. A brutal, illegal directive that would ultimately determine the fate of several of the mission's participants who fell into German hands during the operation's various stages.
The remaining 3 canoes and their 6-man crew continued the difficult, physically exhausting journey up the Gironde estuary over the following several nights, paddling under cover of darkness while concealing themselves and their canoes as best possible during daylight hours to avoid detection by German patrols and French collaborationist observers, who remained a constant, genuine threat throughout the team's extended approach toward Bordeaux, given that any local civilian sighting and reporting of the unusual canoe team's presence could easily have resulted in the entire mission's discovery and the team's subsequent capture or death.
A third canoe was lost during this extended approach phase, with its crew similarly becoming separated from the group and eventually being captured by French police and subsequently handed over to German authorities, again resulting in the eventual execution of these captured Marines under the German Commando order, further reducing the size of the raiding party that would ultimately reach Bordeaux harbor itself to carry out the mission's actual demolition objectives.
Despite these severe losses, reducing the original 10-man, 5-canoe raiding party to just 2 remaining canoes and 4 Marines by the time the team finally approached Bordeaux harbor itself, Hassler and his remaining team members pressed forward with the mission's core objective, finally reaching the harbor area on the night of December 11th and 12th, 1942, after several nights of extraordinarily demanding, dangerous paddling through hostile, heavily monitored waters.
Upon finally reaching the harbor, the remaining team members worked through the night to attach their magnetic limpet mines to the hulls of several German merchant vessels docked within the harbor, a delicate, dangerous underwater task that required the Marines to work quietly and carefully in the cold, dark water directly alongside enemy vessels, setting timed detonators on each mine before quietly withdrawing from the harbor area to begin the difficult journey away from the immediate target zone before the charges detonated and alerted German forces to the raid's occurrence. This attachment process required each 2-man canoe crew to paddle silently alongside their assigned target vessels, with one Marine typically responsible for maintaining the canoe's position and stability, while the second Marine reached into the cold water to physically attach the magnetic mines to the ship's hull below the waterline, a task that demanded genuine physical strength and precision, given the difficulty of manipulating equipment underwater in complete darkness, while simultaneously remaining alert for any sign of German sentries or patrol activity along the harbor stocks. Each mine needed to be positioned carefully to maximize the resulting damage once detonated, and the Marines worked methodically across multiple vessels over the course of the night, distributing their limited supply of mines across as many different ships as their remaining resources allowed, understanding that the raid's overall strategic impact would depend directly on how effectively they were able to maximize the number of vessels damaged during this single, unrepeatable opportunity. The genuine tension of this phase of the operation can hardly be overstated, with the Marines working within mere feet of armed German sentries patrolling the harbor's docks throughout the night. Any single moment of carelessness or bad fortune carrying the potential to expose the entire raiding party to immediate discovery and almost certain capture or death. A risk the team accepted as an unavoidable, inherent part of the mission's fundamental design, given that no less exposed method of delivering explosive charges against harbor-docked vessels genuinely existed within the operational constraints the mission faced. The limpet mines successfully detonated as planned in the hours following the team's attack, inflicting significant damage on several German merchant vessels docked within Bordeaux harbor, achieving the mission's core strategic objective of disrupting German shipping operations at this critical harbor facility, a genuine tactical success that came at an enormously disproportionate human cost, given the severe losses the raiding party had already sustained during its approach to the target. Having successfully completed the harbor attack, the surviving team members now faced the equally daunting challenge of attempting to escape occupied France entirely, recognizing that any attempt to paddle their canoes back down the heavily patrolled estuary toward the coast, now considerably more alert and vigilant following the harbor attack's discovery,
would represent an almost certainly fatal undertaking. Instead, Hasler and his surviving team members abandoned their canoes and attempted to make their way overland through occupied France, relying on French resistance contacts to help guide them toward neutral Spain, from which they might eventually be able to return to Britain.
This overland escape attempt proved genuinely successful for Hasler and his canoe partner, Marine Bill Sparks, who, with considerable assistance from French resistance networks willing to accept enormous personal risk in providing shelter, false documentation, and guidance, successfully made their way across occupied France and eventually crossed into neutral Spain, from which they were ultimately able to arrange passage back to Britain, becoming the only 2 members of the original 10-man raiding party to successfully complete the entire mission and return home alive.
The escape journey itself required Hasler and Sparks to travel several hundred miles across occupied French territory, moving primarily on foot and by whatever local transportation their resistance contacts could safely arrange, passing through a chain of safe houses and sympathetic local contacts organized through the broader French resistance network, an escape route that had been developed and refined over the preceding years, specifically to help downed Allied airmen and other stranded military personnel make their way toward neutral Spanish territory. Each stage of this journey carried genuine, continuous risk of discovery, requiring Hasler and Sparks to maintain careful cover stories and rely entirely on the judgment and local knowledge of resistance contacts who were, in many cases, risking their own lives and the safety of their families by providing this assistance to 2 escaped British commandos, whose presence, if discovered by German or collaborationist French authorities, would have resulted in severe consequences, not only for the 2 Marines themselves, but for everyone who had assisted them along the way. The remaining 2 Marines who had reached Bordeaux harbor alongside Hasler and Sparks, Corporal Albert Levere and Marine William Mills, were captured by German forces during their own separate attempt to escape overland following the harbor attack, and, consistent with the brutal pattern that had already claimed several of their fellow Marines captured during the mission's earlier stages, were subsequently executed under the terms of Hitler's Commando order, bringing the total number of Marines killed or executed during the entire operation to 8 of the original 10 participants, an extraordinarily severe casualty rate that reflected just how genuinely dangerous and, in retrospect, close to suicidal the entire undertaking had actually been.
News of the operation's severe casualties and the brutal execution of captured Marines under the German Commando order eventually reached British authorities and, following the war's end, contributed to the post-war prosecution of German officials responsible for implementing and carrying out this illegal order, part of the broader post-war effort to hold accountable those responsible for war crimes committed against legitimate Allied military personnel throughout the conflict. A small measure of post-war accountability for the brutal fate that had befallen the majority of Hasler's original raiding party. Hitler's Commando order, issued in October 1942, shortly before Operation Frankton was carried out, represented a deliberate, explicit directive that captured Allied commando and special operations personnel be executed immediately upon capture, rather than afforded the legal protections normally guaranteed to prisoners of war under international law, a directive Hitler justified through the claim that such raiding forces operated outside the conventional rules of warfare and therefore did not merit the protections those rules would otherwise provide. This order represented a clear, deliberate violation of established international law governing the treatment of captured military personnel, and its application to the captured members of Hasler's raiding party reflected the genuine, severe personal risk that every participant in the mission had understood themselves to be accepting from the very outset. Given that capture, for men undertaking exactly this kind of unconventional raiding mission, now carried the near-certain prospect of summary execution rather than the comparatively survivable fate of conventional prisoner of war status. The post-war prosecution of German officers and officials responsible for implementing the Commando order in the specific case of the captured Operation Frankton Marines formed part of the broader Nuremberg era and subsequent war crimes trials conducted by Allied authorities in the years immediately following the war, trials that work to establish legal accountability for the systematic violation of international law that orders like the Commando order had represented throughout the conflict, providing at least some measure of formal justice for Marines whose deaths had resulted directly from an order that stood in clear violation of the established rules of war that all combatant nations, Germany included, had formally agreed to observe.
Winston Churchill, upon learning the full details of the operation and its outcome, reportedly later remarked that the raid, considering its results in relation to the very small numbers of men involved, might reasonably be considered one of the most courageous and imaginative of the entire war, a characterization that reflected the genuine, extraordinary disproportion between the mission's minimal manpower and resource commitment and the meaningful strategic damage the surviving team members ultimately succeeded in inflicting on German shipping operations at Bordeaux, achieved despite catastrophic losses that reduced the original raiding party by 80% before the mission's core objective had even been accomplished.
The operation's severe casualty rate and the brutal fate of the captured Marines executed under the German Commando order also contributed to broader shifts in how British military planners subsequently approached the design and authorization of similarly high-risk commando and special operations rates throughout the remainder of the war, with the operation's outcome serving as a genuinely sobering case study regarding the enormous human cost that missions of this nature could impose, even when the operation itself ultimately succeeded in achieving its core strategic objective. In the years following the war, the story of Operation Frankton gradually became more widely known to the British public, particularly following the 1955 release of a feature film dramatizing the raid, which brought the operation and its participants the nickname by which they have since become popularly known, the Cockleshell Heroes, a reference to the small, fragile canoes that had carried the raiding party on their extraordinarily dangerous journey up the Gironde estuary toward Bordeaux harbor. This growing post-war public recognition helped ensure that the extraordinary courage and sacrifice of the 8 Marines who did not survive the mission, alongside the genuine achievement of Hasler and Sparks in both completing the harbor attack and successfully evading capture during their subsequent overland escape, received the kind of sustained public memory and historical documentation that many similarly dangerous, high-risk special operations missions conducted throughout the war did not always receive in the decades immediately following the conflict's end, given how many such operations remained subject to ongoing secrecy classifications, or simply failed to capture the same degree of public and media attention that Operation Frankton's specific combination of daring concept and severe human cost eventually generated. Major Hasler and Marine Sparks, the 2 surviving participants who successfully completed the entire mission and returned to Britain, both received significant military honors in recognition of their roles in the operation, with Hasler receiving the Distinguished Service Order, one of Britain's most significant military honors, while Sparks received the Distinguished Service Medal, formal recognition of an operation whose ultimate success had come at such an extraordinarily disproportionate human cost relative to the small number of men originally selected to carry it out. The broader historical assessment of Operation Frankton in the decades since the war has generally emphasized both the genuine tactical and strategic value the raid achieved, successfully disrupting German shipping operations at a critical harbor facility through means that no conventional military operation could realistically have achieved given Bordeaux's difficult, heavily defended inland location, and the sobering, difficult questions the operation's catastrophic casualty rate raises regarding the genuine human cost that this kind of high-risk special operations raid frequently demanded from the small number of specially selected volunteers tasked with carrying them out. Men who, in the case of Operation Frankton specifically, understood from the very outset of their training that the mission they had volunteered for carried an entirely realistic prospect that the overwhelming majority of them would not survive to see its completion. This has been Forgotten Frontlines. Every story we bring you is researched, written, and brought to life by the V-Team, because some battles deserve to be remembered, no matter how strange, no matter how forgotten. If this story moved you, like this video, share it with someone who loves history, and subscribe for more forgotten stories from the front lines of the past. We'll see you in the next one.